Welcome everybody to our Planning Committee meeting on the 7th of April 2025. This is a publicly broadcasted meeting that is streamed live via our website and available on YouTube. I would therefore ask you to conduct yourselves in an appropriate manner. I welcome those present in the public seating area and ask you to be respectful to the committee members, its officers, as well as those speaking. I ask that you remain seated and quiet during these proceedings. My name is Councillor Harvey Coggins and I am Chairman of Lichfield's Planning Committee. In a moment, I will ask everyone participating in this meeting to introduce themselves. Before doing so, can I remind everyone in the meeting to ensure that your mobile and electronic devices are either switched off or muted throughout the session. Those who have registered to speak, please ensure that your content is relevant and material to the debate in hand. You are mindful of the allotted speaking time. If you go over this time, you will be asked to stop immediately. When speaking, please speak clearly for the benefit of those following from home, as well as those in the room. Planning Committee is a non-political, quasi-judicial committee bound by National Planning Policy Framework, Lichfield's local plan and supplementary planning guidance. Our decisions are informed by planning consideration tied to these policies, but it is not a pure science. We must weigh up benefit and harm when coming to a view. The arrangements for conducting this meeting will be as follows. Officers will introduce each application. Any members of the public or applicants' agents who have registered to speak will then be invited by me to address the committee in turn. Members are reminded to keep their questions to the point and on matters of clarification for planning issues only. Technical questions or clarification of details of the application will generally best be directed to the officers. Committee members will then discuss and decide on the officers' recommendations on each application. I also be clear that we cannot receive questions or comments from anyone in the public seating area. Please be assured that the committee will aim to thoroughly question and consider all matters before it in coming to a decision. When we come to vote on the application, I will initially ask all members to confirm if they are minded to approve the recommendations in the report by raising their hand. I will then ask those of you voting against the recommendations or abstaining to confirm the specific planning reasons you are doing so. In the event of a vote being carried against the officers' recommendations, I will ask officers to comment on the validity of the planning reasons, and if recommended by officers, we'll ask members to vote again on whether to defer that item for a further report on those reasons. If for any reason a member is not present for the whole of an item, they will be asked not to vote on that application. We'll now ask all members and officers participating to introduce themselves. Let's start at this end of the table, please.
Thank you, Chair. I am Christine Lewis. I'm the Elections and Democratic Manager and Deputy Monitoring Officer.
Councillor Andrew Rushton.
Councillor Hugh Ashton, Vice Chair of this committee.
Kate Cartwright, Governance Officer.
Sorry, Max Arif, Legal Advisor.
Kerry Challoner, Development Management Manager.
Tom Watts, Planning Officer.
Councillor Jane Anketell.
Councillor Keith Vernon.
Councillor Di Evans.
Councillor Sharon Taylor.
Councillor Sonia Wilcott.
Councillor Jamie Checkland.
Councillor David Salter.
Councillor Serena Mears.
Councillor Derek Cross.
Councillor Joe Powell.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, we'll move on to the next matter on the first matter on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. Got apologies from Councillor Marshall. No? Okay. Number 2, declarations of interest. Have we got anybody who needs to declare a declaration of interest? No, nothing tonight. Okay, nothing on that one. Minutes of the previous meeting. Are we all happy with these? Has anybody got any comments to make before we accept them?
Yeah.
Okay, they're accepted as correct. We've moved. Thank you. Okay, on to the applications. So the first application we've got tonight at committee is 25/00129 FUH Fairfield Ford Lane, Chorley, Lichfield. Okay, so I'll pass this on to the officer for the presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair. No problem. Okay, so item 1 this evening relates to property known as Fairfield in Chorley, planning reference 25/00129/FP. There's the location plan showing the outline of the application site in red there. And the aerial photograph. And so in terms of the aerial photograph, I'll just point out, see if I can get my mouse to work. I'll try the pointer. Probably using technology then. So to the immediate north of the application site. To the immediate north of the application site is property known as Northfield. The immediate south is Beechmount. To the rear of the site is agricultural fields and then agricultural land. And then we've also got a public right of way, Farewell and Chorley number 1. That's thank you. So if I just go back, we've got Northfield here, got Beechmount to the south, we've got agricultural land, and then we also have the village hall and a public right of way that kind of goes along the top, and then it follows this hedge line on the other side. Back, that's Farewell and Chorley number 1. So we're in the rural hamlet of Chorley, characterised by detached, larger property, detached or semi-detached as well, larger properties set within spacious frontages. There's no distinct style, but there are other dormer windows present. Just take you through some of the photographs of the existing property. You can all, hopefully you can all see this. There's the existing property with its dormer window across the front. This is Beechmount, and that's Northfield there. Notice the ground level differences. We'll see that on the other pictures as well. These photographs are taken from the south, from Beechmount. So again, you can see the sort of ground level differences there. That's their single story down here. Obviously, the first floor, the application property is set up. There's a first floor window there and the first floor of the application property, so it is set up there. These are just some of the pictures around Chorley, showing that there are dormer windows of varying designs of property as well in the hamlet. Okay, so turning to the original property, this is quite important. We are, I should point out that we're looking at the retention of the front dormer windows, the retention of the rear dormer windows with some alterations, which I'll take you through in more detail in a minute, and story rear extension and roof light. The original property is quite important in this location because we are in the West Midlands Green Belt and there is policies associated with that as set out in the original property was, as you can see on here. This plan is from the 1987 for the property, which allowed a kitchen extension at the rear, a garage extension and the conversion of the roof. So development at the property has gone on over a number of years. There was a bit more development more recently at the site, as you'll see in the background information on the report. More recently, there have been unauthorised extensions added, namely here to the front, the dormer window across the front, the dormer window across the back, and this sort of part on the end here. These unauthorised works led to 2 enforcement notices being served, one of which has been complied with, and that was removing this gable on the end, which is also visible on the back. So that has been complied with because that has been removed in full. The remaining notice relates to the dormer windows, and the requirements of that notice were to demolish and remove the 2 dormer windows to the rear and front of the roof planes, make good the resulting openings, and match the original profile of the roof line. So in other words, take all dormers off the property. Now I have to remember that this property did have dormer windows on before the before the applicants started these more recent works. There is also in the background information section, there's consent for a single story 8 metre deep extension, and that was under the prior notification, larger householder extensions. So they do have a fallback position of a single story 8 metre deep rear extension. So turning to the proposals that are before us tonight, the front dormer would be retained as it is. The rear dormer would be retained, but there'd be amendments made to the central and the left hand as you view it openings. Now, these currently have, I think the middle one has your doors which open outwards, and there are also doors on this one as well. This window is fixed. It provides light to a stairwell, so it's kind of up in the air as you're inside the property. Also proposed on the back is that roof light. Don't let me forget about the roof light as I get carried away talking about the dormer changes. The proposed changes, we change these to inward opening doors with what's known as a Juliet balustrade that goes across. It is a modern balustrade that would be glazed, and the most recent plans that were submitted after the report was published, the applicants have agreed to obscurely glaze these balustrades, and that was at the request of the neighbours, I believe. But effectively, yeah, they would be obscurely glazed now. Also visible on there is the rear extension, which is now 5.7 metres in depth rather than 8 metres in depth. It has a flat roof with a parapet on each side and these roof lights, roof lanterns. That's just the planning drawings from above. Internally, there's 3 bedrooms upstairs and a bathroom, and a very small bedroom it would be in the very end that would just be served by a roof light. This drawing shows the street scene and the scale in relation to the neighbouring properties, and also, importantly, the ground level differences. That concludes my presentation in terms of visuals. I'll just point out in terms of the green belt, there are allowances in the NPPF, but effectively, the NPPF says that for extensions to a property, they can't be disproportionate. They can't be disproportionate to the original dwelling house. And remember, the original dwelling house is quite small in this case, a little modest bungalow. So the report sets out that we consider as officers that this is a disproportionate addition. So then you have to weigh it against anything else in the planning balance. In the planning balance, there's a fallback position of the 8 metre deep rear extension. Case law tells us that this is a legitimate fallback position. The applicants could build that tomorrow and we would have no control as a local authority. They also have permitted development rights, which could lead to outbuildings being built in the rear garden and so on. The report sets out that we concluded that the fallback outweighs the harm arising from the inappropriateness and the impact on the green belt. And in order to make that robust, PD rights would be removed from the dwelling for outbuildings as well. In terms of the impact on residential amenity, the main concerns arise at the back. The potential use of these areas to get out onto the flat roof section below. The main concerns were resulting from that would be overlooking an impact on privacy, but also impacts on light was raised. In terms of impacts on light, it's concluded that the proposal complies with our 45-degree code policy. A lot of that is due to the ground level differences, but also where the extension sits in relation to its neighbouring properties. The amendments to the windows and doors on the rear elevation, we've put a condition on to say that that should be done within 2 months of the approval. We also have, in this case, we also have the outstanding enforcement notice, which means that the council still have the opportunity to prosecute if this doesn't happen. So that condition says that all these works have got to be done within 2 months to make that dormer window acceptable in planning terms. Let me take a drink. Turning to the flat roof over the rear extension, and permitted development rights have also been removed to stop that being turned into some kind of outdoor decking, outdoor seating or amenity area. The wording from that condition is from a model condition used by the planning inspectorate. So as officers, we think that that is sufficiently robust. The enforcement team have also reviewed our conditions that we're putting on and are happy that they are meeting the enforcement tests as well. In terms of ecology, that was another thing that was raised. The lighting, external lighting, and so on, that's subject to a license that we would like to be submitted for further assessment, and that's in line with the sort of industry standards to protect bats, because that was the main concern that was raised by our ecology officer when we discussed it with him. I should just highlight the supplementary paper, which takes into account these changes to the obscure glazing on the balustrades, and also provides responses to the issues that were raised directly to members of the committee on the 30th of March by email. So hopefully that's helpful too. That does conclude my presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we'll move on to the speakers. We've got 3 speakers in total on this application. So firstly, I'd like to call Mr. John Weldon to the chair here. Thank you. If you just come up to this chair.
Thank you, Justin.
Okay. So what will happen is you'll be given 5 minutes to speak, which will begin when you start speaking. We'll give you a warning 30 seconds towards the end, and then you'll have to stop speaking after 5 minutes. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Committee, I speak on behalf of Mr. Weldon, whose home is adjacent to the application site. The report tells us the site has a lengthy planning history and is the subject of 2 enforcement notices. The application itself states some works were commenced on the 10th of July 2015, which is just under 10 years ago. The applicants have proven themselves to be nothing if not persistent, and have pushed for what they want to build and not what planning policy allows. They have done this through a combination of unauthorised works, retrospective planning applications and planning appeals. As a result of their persistence and apparent willingness to take no for an answer, the applicants have clearly become something of a nuisance. The planning department might be forgiven for wanting to rid itself of this long-running problem site. The committee shall, starting point, be guided by the officer's report, which recommends approval. Mr. Weldon's concerns have been set out and explained in his very detailed letter of objection, which includes volume calculations. I hope you have all had an opportunity to consider it carefully. Paraphrasing it in the limited time available to me, certainly not do it justice. The difference is that in a nutshell, the council has already refused an application which included the dormer windows. Refusal was made on the basis of scale and massing and being contrary to the development in the green belt. The report states that because the property was originally a modest bungalow, the proposal is a disproportionate addition and therefore prohibited. The report also states the works harm the openness of the green belt. However, the report then refers to a permission issued in 23 for a rear extension and describes this as the fallback position regarding what can be built. The report follows up on this point by describing the fallback position as being less desirable than what is in the application and recommends the council allows the retention of what has been built because what could have been built but wasn't is worse. A fallback position is indeed a material consideration, and such bargaining chips can and are used as leverage to secure new planning permissions. However, we say this situation is very different from the usual comparison of two potential developments when neither has yet been carried out. The difference is that the rear extension was permitted in September 23. The enforcement notice was issued in October 23. Enforcement is discretionary, and by the very act of issuing the enforcement notice, the council was saying in unequivocal terms, these works are unacceptable. That notice has not been withdrawn, as you've heard. The applicant could, at that time, have been invited to make a planning application to retain the unauthorised works, but the council preferred to issue the notice. However, this report now argues the existing works are the lesser of two evils in the Greenbelt and so should be permitted. We believe the overall situation has been poorly explained and poorly argued. We argue that if the fallback position is to be relied upon in support of a decision to grant permission based on very special circumstances, and moreover relied upon as the only real argument, then the comparison between the two developments needs to be more detailed, not as case law tells us through an excessively forensic or mathematical calculation, but certainly by better comparisons than are before you today. After the enforcement notice is in effect, the local authority may decline to determine a subsequent application which relates to the breach. However, enforcement action, as you've heard, is in abeyance pending the outcome of this very application. By accepting this application, the council has created confusion and an opportunity to further delay matters, even if it is refused, because the applicants can appeal to the Secretary of State. This situation should not have occurred. Residents and the Greenbelt shall experience the consequences of your decision for years to come. And so in closing, I strongly suggest that if you are indeed minded to grant permission based only on the basis of it being the lesser of two evils in the Greenbelt, that you defer your final decision until you have visited the site and gained a thorough understanding of the situation,
Seconds remain.
which unfortunately can't be fully conveyed in written reports and submissions. Thank you, committee.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
And so the next speaker we've got, I'd like to ask up to the chair is Darren Inslee, the applicant's agent, please. Yeah, again, the same, you'll have 5 minutes. Your time will begin when you start speaking and we'll give you a warning 30 seconds towards the end.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
Yes, good evening. I'm Darren Inslee, the agent acting on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Baird. I'm a chartered architectural technologist with over 36 years experience in designing extensions and submitting planning applications. Prior to my involvement, the applicant has been working with the local planning authority to resolve this long-running situation. They have already removed a substantial element of first floor extension to the side of the bungalow, leaving just the front and rear dormers, which the report refers to. I was asked to get involved in November last year to try and resolve the planning situation. Initially, we engaged with the council's enforcement officer, and following discussion, which included the planning officer, it was agreed that an application to formalise both the dormers and rear extension would be the most sensible way forward. During this pre-planning discussion, it was demonstrated that a fallback position could be implemented. The proposed extensions could be justified by virtue of the previously approved scheme by means of reducing the volume of the approved extension equal to that of the front and rear dormers. By calculation, the fallback position would allow a volume of 785 cubic metres, the same volume as what is now under consideration. Therefore, the proposal would have no more harm on the setting of the Greenbelt than what the fallback position would have. The planning officer in their report confirms this to be a valid planning position and carries considerable weight. The proposals under consideration would have no impact on neighbouring properties with regards to light, overbearing or privacy. Notwithstanding this, the applicant has agreed to the request by Beechmount to obscure glaze the glass guarding to the 2-bedroom doors within the dormer. The planning officer has confirmed in their report that the proposal meets both the council's Sustainable Design (SPD) and District Design Guides. To reinforce this position, in the recent appeal decision, the Planning Inspectorate made the following comments regarding the dormers. Whilst noting the points raised in objection by a neighbouring resident, I saw the surrounding area to contain a variety of designs and facing materials. The more contemporary appearance created through the use of grey UPVC cladding and dark window frames may not reflect the original appearance of the dwelling, but I am satisfied that within context of individually designed dwellings, the overall form of the building would not upset a consistent pattern or otherwise jar with surrounding development. Therefore, I find the effect of the proposal on character and appearance to be neutral matter in the overall planning balance. The planning officer concur with the inspector's view. In conclusion, the applicant has shown by the removal of work and ongoing dialogue through design revisions to have worked proactively with the local planning authority in trying to resolve this matter, and therefore we would respectfully request the planning committee to run with your planning officer's recommendation to approve the application with the recommended conditions. Thank you.
Very much for that. One more speaker on this. Welcome Councillor Strachan to the chair.
Thank you.
I've got 10 minutes to speak on this as ward member. I'll give you a warning, 30 seconds towards the end of that.
Thank you. I hope not to use all 10 minutes. Thank you, committee, for considering this, and can I thank the planning officer as well for a very helpful summary. Members, I'll remind you this is largely a retrospective application, and so I just remind you of your need to determine this as if it were not built out. And that's why the planning history of this becomes so relevant. Because if you look at the history, it's perhaps difficult to believe, but you've just seen the drawings, that this was originally a bungalow and was extended by a loft conversion in 1987 to form a first floor. And then there's a series of planning applications running from 2014 onwards, including a permission in 2014, which was never built out, but there were then non-compliant extensions built, which this authority then refused in 2023, and they were appealed unsuccessfully. There was some further unauthorised development refused in June of 2023 on the rear extension, and there are two separate enforcement notices, which previous speakers have noted are now 15 months old. Notice A relating to the dormers and the fenestration, which has not yet been complied with, and Notice B relating to the removal of that significant wraparound extension on the first floor, which you saw in the pictures, and that's largely been removed and made good. And finally, we have the consented rear extension, which was approved by prior notification. That's a situation in which Lichfield District Council were unfortunately rather the architects of its own downfall, because for a number of years we had failed to enforce our own policies. And so that prior notification got in through the back door. But members, there have also been a raft of submitted and subsequently withdrawn applications. This has rumbled on for a significant number of years, and the weight of documents that Mr. Weldon has submitted to you shows that complete history, and I thank you for doing the courtesy of reading those. Where they're particularly pertinent will be the appeal decision relating to the roof height, the appeal decision relating to the rear fenestration, and our own decision notices relating to the impact on the green belt. The members, turning to that final point first, if we return to our core principles, this is fundamentally a line of heavily extended bungalows on a gently falling hillside in the village of Chorley, and I concede at this point there is no particular vernacular. Chorley, there is no settled design code as such. They've all been extended, in many cases quite significantly, and I concede there is no law against having or wanting a big house, as long as it's in conformity with planning legislation and local policy. These extensions have been found to be in breach of our policies a number of times, both by us as the local planning authority and by the planning inspectorate in appeals. And in previous decisions on this very point, it has been found that there is unacceptable harm caused to the openness of the green belt, and that's conceded by our officers this evening. And that previously they've said that no very special circumstances apply. Members, that position on harm is unchanged by this report. In fact, the only change is the existence of that prior notification on the very special circumstances. While the previously consented extension to the rear is bigger and longer, it is also lower and has less of a visual impact given the hedge and the fence lines at the rear of the properties. This would be visible from those public rights of way as well as by the neighbouring property as a rather tall rear extension. I'm also a little bit concerned that the difficulties with relying on that prior notification as causing very special circumstances, because that is more harmful than this, is effectively holding this committee to ransom on that point, and I would urge caution on it. But putting it very simply on the greenbelt impacts and on very special circumstances, this represents a near tripling of the original size of that bungalow on a property which has been in the greenbelt or its equivalent throughout its history. And as an aside, I would adopt those points as applying to the impact on the area of outstanding natural beauty and on the street scene, giving its visibility and its prominent position in the village. Turning to roof heights and the impact on that, members will see from the orientation and the drawings that that rear extension runs alongside the objector's fence and rear garden. And notwithstanding the falling ground levels, this does present a significant physical barrier along that side of the garden with a consequential impact on both perception and on openness. That is, of course, governed by policies. And I do note within the report of paragraph 14.5, it's conceded that the 45-degree rule is breached even by this extension, notwithstanding the falling ground height. You may also recall from reading the judgment on the planning inspectorate that the height of that wall was engaged and considered in a previous decision in which a potential height to eaves was considered in the context of that extension. And that was a barely acceptable height that was put and is breached by 70 centimetres by this application, resulting in a tall and dark mass alongside the objector's garden. And in those photographs, you can also see the height of the ridge on that rear extension. Efforts have been made by the objectors to measure that by overgrowing the existing boundary planting, but that's now having an impact on their garden where overshadowing is causing dieback of plant and grass growth in that previous garden. And so while I accept the fallback position is also longer and also breaches the 45-degree rule, it is 30 centimetres lower and has less of an overbearing impact. Members, you've seen the 3 large dormer windows to the rear of the proposed development. They are already in place, and I believe it's 2 of them that currently contain outward opening French windows, which could be perceived to give access to the roof of the current extension and its current construction. Given the history of the site and the series of unauthorised uses, members may also share the objector's concern that this did show an intention to use that roof as roof of the extension as a de facto balcony or roof deck. And it's fair to say that given the many years that this has rumbled on, and I think this might be the worst one I've seen in 16 years of being a councillor, all trust between these 2 neighbours appears to have been eroded by this history. It's also previously contained quite a bright and unconsented lighting scheme, which is not in this application, although anticipated by condition. And I'd suggest that that would further undermine trust by suggesting it were to be used as a balcony. I will turn to that point when I get to the end. However, this point was also considered by the planning inspectorate on fenestration at the rear of the property, who did make some observations about not only the fact of privacy, but also the perception of privacy when one's garden is overlooked by 3 very large dormer windows. The objectors do feel overlooked by those windows, even though one is reportedly only there to provide light to the stairwell. And this is accepted by the planning inspectorate previously, who said that rather than half obscured, these should be conventional windows. It's also noted that the one that's nearest to the objector's property does not bear an obscured Juliet balcony, which further gives the impression, if not the fact, of overlook. Members, you can only consider what is before you, but I would suggest that that scheme of fenestration at the rear cannot be acceptable in planning terms given privacy. And for all those reasons, I must ask the committee to give some consideration to refusing this application tonight for the reasons of impact on the Greenbelt, planning policy and residential amenity to the residents of Northfield. I've heard the objector's solicitor give recommendation to deferral. I hadn't previously thought that. I felt it was more appropriate to try and draw a line under the history of this tonight. However, if the committee felt that that were appropriate, I would of course be minded to adopt that. If you were not to agree with me and felt that you chose to approve this application, I would seek a variation of condition 5 to prevent the windows from even being inward opening, to have those as either non-opening dormers or conventional fenestration. And I do note that the balcony and no roof access except for maintenance is now safeguarded by condition 9 of this paper. I and the objectors would also entirely endorse that if you were to choose to approve this. And finally, I would endorse and support the decision to remove any further permitted development rights if this application were to be consented. But members, I'd like to thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you very much, Councillor Strachan. And before we move on to questions and comments from members, can I just please confirm the surname of the first speaker?
Bryce Jones.
Yeah. Got that. Okay. So, some questions, please. Okay, Councillor Mears, please.
Can I ask why the second enforcement notice was put into abeyance?
So the second enforcement notice is still a live enforcement notice. I'm not an enforcement officer, but I believe that they have, they're holding it back because there's a current application for us to deal with.
Follow up with the second question. Which came first, the enforcement or the planning application? The enforcement came first.
Yeah.
Okay, councillor Powell next, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's a sorry story, this one, isn't it? And the length of time it's been going backwards and forward is not good at all, folks. I have to agree with Councillor Strachan on many of the issues he raised. I think, based on what the officers have said, there is a degree there for them to say, yes, it's reached a point where we could approve what's there, but it certainly needs some mitigation. It certainly needs some conditions forcing. And if we do vote for it to proceed, I would certainly move for, as Councillor Strachan requested, that the opening doors are not opening, they are just solid, no opening in or out, and they are obscured as well. This is a gross overlooking of the neighbour's property. I think they do have a right to their privacy, and I think it breaches it. So I would recommend on that. I'm also concerned that the green belt policy is being attacked and attacked again. We all know grey belt is being looked at, or possibly being looked at, to come with it. I think this might set a precedent that would be unfortunate for that particular area. So again, I think we have to consider what conditions can we add to this to really make sure that this is it. No more turning up with retrospective and that's it. If they do anything else that's out, then our enforcement people move and they have to remove it.
Okay, yep, councillor Salter.
Thank you, Chair. Similar vein there, particularly with the right issue. The right-hand window, I think I'm correct in saying, looking at the back view, is for light only over a stairwell. So I can see no reason why that should not be fully obscured if it is for light only and not view, thereby giving perception, if you like, of privacy to the neighbours. And again, I would go along with the recommendation of having traditional or conventional windows rather than doors for the other two.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vernon, please.
What confuses me slightly was that if the dormer windows, and I presume they are the same dormer windows, if they were originally deemed to be unacceptable and an enforcement notice was issued, does it mean that if you keep applying, then suddenly they become acceptable? What now makes them acceptable when they weren't before? Perhaps the officers could answer that.
Yeah, yes,
For
please.
you, Chair. So the enforcement notices were issued at a time when the works were being fully undertaken to the property. The enforcement team split it into two main areas. What I would say is there were dormer windows at the back of this property. There were some consented in 1987. They were smaller. They were set further back into the roof, but there were dormer windows with fully glazed windows in the back of that property. The enforcement notices require the applicants to remove the dormer windows completely. And on review, I think that they've felt that that is quite draconian, considering that there was windows in the property before. And that's where we've got to the situation that we're in now. The hall's reason for refusal last time was scale, mass and design, when you're looking at the whole thing. And obviously, but there was confusingly, there was two enforcement notices. The one section has now been removed.
The smaller windows were deemed unacceptable, but the larger windows are being accepted. When you said they were smaller.
Oh, previously there was an application in 1987 that permitted rooms in the roof, and there was also another one in 2014. Again, there was a dormer to the roof. So the principle of having dormer windows in the roof of that property in the back has been accepted previously.
Okay, thank you.
So across, please.
Thank you, Chair.
I'd just like to ask the officer and the planning officer a question here. There just appears to me to be various issues that do not comply with our design code, literally design code. For instance, cladding. Two other issues there as well. Can you just advise me why that's been overlooked?
It hasn't been overlooked. It has been referred to in my report. In terms of the design code, the design code says that it's actually difficult to write rules about identity in the rural areas. It also gives advice on dormer windows. It says the code is not prescriptive in terms of architectural style. And in the materials, it says large areas of render and timber cladding are not permitted. Now, the property was rendered before all of this, so we haven't got any control over that. In terms of the areas of cladding, yes, there is areas of cladding, but it's not, I wouldn't say that, well, my professional opinion is it's not large areas, and the inspector also made reference to the cladding being acceptable.
Thank you.
I've got Councillor Checkland next, please.
Right. The dormer window side of things, they're replacement dormer windows for something that was previously there, just a different style. So the enforcement notice is served on the basis they were opening patio doors onto a flat roof. That has now been restricted to opening inwards and a smoke glass balustrade. So in effect, it's become a dormer window that could be open. So I don't quite see the benefit of having two doors that open into your bedroom anymore. You might as well go back to just having some bricks and some dormer windows. I know that's not what, so I don't honestly see how we can argue against the dormer windows. The height of the building, I'd like a little bit more, or refresh my memory on the information about the height of it and the various angles and how it affects the light, if possible, please, because I personally don't see that we can get to what's been proposed now for the dormer side of stuff. The 2014 application gave planning permission for it to go with the first floor as well, and it was interesting. I understood that hadn't been implemented, but from the talk that was given earlier, it said the work started in 2015, but presumably that wasn't sufficient to extinct, is that the word, to protect the actual planning that was in 2014. Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah, they didn't implement in accordance with the plans, so.
Right, so some work started just after it, but not sufficient to protect what would have been a much, much bigger build. Right. Okay, if you can answer me the stuff in relation to the roof and the lighting.
So alterations have been made to the roof, and the roof is slightly high. The roof ridge is slightly higher. In terms of I think the heights that have been referred to in the correspondence and certainly referred to in the objections raised is about the height of the rear extension in relation to the height of the permitted development extension. If you just bear with me, I'll get I think I put the figures directly into the paper. The consented single-storey rear under prior notification allowed an 8-metre deep rear extension, reaching a maximum height of 3.35 metres with eaves at 2.6. The overall height of the proposed extension would measure 3 metres with parapet to each side. That adds 30 centimetres on each side. Now we're talking about 30 centimetres here. The 45-degree code on a level playing field, if it's clipped, then that's an issue. But we do have to take into account ground level differences. And the ground level differences between them properties are more than 30 centimetres. So in terms of defending that on appeal, that we handle very much a chance, I'm afraid.
You said yes, it is above, but if it was on a flat playing field, it would be above. But because it's on a sloping playing field, if they were next door. Okay. Right. So that's helped me.
Councillor Mears, please.
I feel that the length of this and how the applicants have repeatedly done whatever they wanted and then decided afterwards to apply for planning permission. And some of it's been refused and there's been enforcement action. I'd like to see each step along the way dealt with on its own merits. So ideally, I feel the cleanest way to handle this would be to deal with the enforcement notice and then to address the planning application. It's almost putting the egg before the chicken to consider a planning application when the enforcement process hasn't run its course.
I hear what you're saying. Max, you might be able to
Yes,
jump in here.
You have an application before you, which you have to determine on its own merits, regardless of whether or not there's an enforcement notice in place. The decision whether or not to actually prosecute on the enforcement notice for breach of the enforcement notice is not a material consideration for you to take into account tonight. So you have to look at the application, look at it on its own merits, and make a decision.
Thank you.
Right, anyone else want to ask a question?
Just to follow up on that, the enforcement, I think, said would still be extant and could still proceed whichever way this goes for the application itself. So that the issue could continue.
Well, the enforcement notice will only have effect insofar as it's not superseded by the planning permission. So only the elements of the enforcement notice that aren't superseded by the planning permission would be still a breach. I think from what the officer's saying, there probably aren't any elements if this is permitted tonight, because they've complied with the original enforcement notice, which was the gable ends.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Councillor Ashton, please.
I'd be interested to know if we are minded to approve this application, would we seek to impose the condition that Councillor Strachan proposed of non-opening doors? In other words, fixed windows, and to make the third window identical with the other two. Would we be prepared to put that in as a additional condition?
Councillor Checkland on that.
So I do struggle with that. I think to have a room that doesn't have an open ventilation, you're taking things a bit too far. And see the concepts of, I don't know whether we can put restrictions in that it becomes a window as opposed to a door, so it can't easily be changed in the future. But to exclude fresh air from a room seems a little bit.
Opening windows, but not opening doors.
The officer in on this one?
Yeah, I just remind members that our conditions have to meet the 5 tests. 6 tests? 6 tests. Our conditions have to meet the 6 tests, and I would say it wouldn't be reasonable.
I think the first one is it has to be necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms, and you would have to have some evidence that it's the condition is necessary, that it's there to prevent a planning harm. That would otherwise result in the permission the proposal not being acceptable. So if you haven't got any evidence to suggest that the condition is necessary, then really you shouldn't be imposing it. Obviously, it also needs to be enforceable, precise, I think reasonably in all other respects. I can't remember the other two, to be honest with you, off the top of my head, but the important one is necessary. You know, on the evidence before you, I think officers are saying that there isn't really a planning reason that would say that you should be put in place a condition to prevent those windows from being opened.
I think I'd also add to that the conditions that have been put forward have been checked by our enforcement manager as well.
I get it. In effect, by the conditions that we're putting on it, having the balustrade that's smoked, that's obscure glass, it's a condition that's made it into a window in effect. But yeah, I get it that we can't change it anymore.
Councillor Salter, please.
One proviso on those, Juliet, balustrades, that they themselves are completely fixed and not in any respect hinged, whereby the doors could be opened inwards and the Juliet balcony outwards.
They are. Yeah, I was going to say a balcony by definition is fixed. That's what the plans are showing as well. So
Councillor Mears?
The planning officers for a brief summary of how this now meets the criteria to be accepted when it was refused in 2023.
Yes, so it was a different development that was refused in 2023. It included a rather large gable on the end, which has now been removed. And also we didn't, although the prior notification was approved later in 2023, I believe, that wasn't used and that wasn't weighed up in the planning balance because I don't think that was a fallback position at that time when they made that decision. The fallback as well isn't just the rear extension, it's the fact that outbuildings could also have the back garden.
Councillor Checkland?
Last point, I promise I'll shut up after that.
It's okay.
Just in relation to enforcement, am I right in thinking you have some legal advice? Is it one of the approaches to dealing with enforcement, a retrospect, the applicant pursue a retrospective planning application, and that is one of the ways forward with an enforcement notice, I understand, to make sure they have got the right legal footing to go ahead with what they have done and shouldn't have done, but it's not necessarily means if we just stuck with enforcement, every single thing would be immediately taken down. I believe it's within the policy that it should be pursued through one of the avenues to pursue through a retrospective.
And that's usually how a local planning authority would deal with a breach of planning enforcement if they believe that potentially there could be a scheme that's acceptable to invite the applicant, well, the recipient of the notice to put in an application to regularise the position. But I mean, in terms of your decision making tonight, the fact that there is enforcement notices that have been served previously and the notices are in place aren't a material consideration for your determination. You've got an application in front of you and you need to determine that application on its merits.
Mm-hmm. I think someone needs to propose something. Unless anyone has got any other questions on material planning considerations. Okay, Councillor Cross, please.
Thank you, Chair. And here, just listening to what everybody's got to say and reading through the notes here, we've got an applicant here who thinks he can override this council and do just as he wants in the past. We would all agree that's not acceptable. We've got a drawing here and we've got a professional advice from our planning officer to approve it. And I propose that we do approve it, but strict control taken on this applicant for any future works he may carry out at that property.
Yeah. So we've got approval there. Yeah.
I'm happy to second that with
and a second.
strict conditions.
Right. I will go to a vote. Yeah. Okay. So everybody that agrees with the approval on that, can they please? Sorry. Sorry.
Interrupt. Can I just clarify? I mean, obviously you proposed grant in accordance with the officer's recommendation, but are you suggesting conditions or entirely clear, or are you suggesting a note to the applicant? Or
I don't think we could put conditions of the card I'd like to put in there, but hopefully our enforcement officers will keep a close eye on this applicant in the future, because I just have a feeling this will not be carried out in accordance with the drawings. But as the drawings are in front of us, like you said, we can approve them. Just need to be careful, make sure they are carried out. If not, we come heavy on this applicant.
Yeah.
So it is just to grant in accordance with the officer's recommendation and the supplemental report as well.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Okay, yes, I did mention.
That's Councillor Salter, please, and then.
I did mention earlier a potential condition of the obscure pass in the window that is unnecessarily clear, as it, one nearest to the neighbours, which gives the impression of lack of privacy. Could we?
I think I'd repeat.
As it is for light only and not a view.
Yeah, that would be a nice thing to have or what have you, but I think in terms of the condition tests, I don't think, my professional opinion is that would not meet the reasonably necessary test.
Okay, so before we go to the vote, I'll just come to Councillor Anketel quickly.
I'm inclined to support the officer's recommendation with the conditions.
the conditions that are listed in the,
Yes, yeah.
okay, right, okay, so we've got an approval and we've got a seconder, so now we'll move to a vote. So everybody that agrees with that, please can they raise their hand?
Or
Yeah, for, sorry, yes, for the offer of recommendation, yeah. Okay. Anybody that's voting against that? Anybody that wishes to abstain? Okay, passed? Yeah, okay, yeah. Thank you, everybody, that's gone through. I'd like to thank everybody for the questions on that and everybody also for attending. We'll just have a brief pause before we start the next application.
Up around the corner.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, everybody, back to the second
Listen.
that we're talking about, second application. That is done. Okay, second application is 25/00032/FUL land at Beacon Park, Adventure Golf, Swan Road, Lichfield City. Move on to the officer's presentation, please. Slightly more jolly than the last one.
All over this.
Everybody.
This application is for the demolition and removal of the existing adventure golf course and replacement with a new 9-hole adventure golf course. It's before you this evening as it's Lichfield District Council application. The existing miniature golf course is located within Beacon Park and lies on the south-eastern edge of the larger golf course and immediately west of the children's play area. The site is located south of the Greenhow Road car park and to the southeast of the area where the committee recently approved a paddle tennis facility. Shore Lane car park is situated to the east and the wider open space of Beacon Park extends to the south and southeast. The existing facility is enclosed by a low timber fence and is mainly laid to lawn. The individual holes are surrounded by block paving. A tree can be seen in the middle of the facility, which will be removed as part of the construction. This will be mitigated by the planting of 2 trees within 30 metres of the site. A condition securing the planting of those trees was included as an additional condition in the supplementary report. A further younger tree, you can just make out in the photo, would be relocated. Further photo showing the site in relation to the children's play area behind. The proposal is for a replacement 9-hole adventure golf facility with larger and more interesting and challenging holes than the existing. The layout with the holes numbered can be seen on the drawing on the right. Each hole is themed around a local landmark or historical figure. For example, hole 1 is themed around Erasmus Darwin. Hole 4 recreates the footprints of Lichfield Cathedral. Hole 7 plays through a stylised Garrick theatre. Members may be aware of an earlier concept presentation which included a poppy-themed hole and one that included an obstacle course. These appeared in a document which was listed in the committee report. However, those concept designs were replaced before submission, following feedback from the National Memorial Arboretum and Friends of Lichfield Historic Parks. They do not feature in any of the submitted plans and would not form part of the approved scheme if permission is granted. The proposed holes and themes are those shown in the submitted plans and elevation drawings and are also reflected in the design and access statement. These drawings illustrate the scale of proposed new structures Both are east facing views, showing how features such as ramps and themed elements will sit within the landscape. There's a closer look here at the each individual hole, including elevations. This shows that holes 4, 5 and 9 involve the most new construction in terms of scale, with the introduction of ramps and a small model representing Lichfield Cathedral. Officers conclude that the application should be supported for the reasons set out in the accompanying report in accordance with the conditions as suggested in the report. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Questions and comments? We've got no speakers on this one, so questions and comments, please. Okay, Councillor Vernon, thank you.
That basically it's replacing like with like. Officers have recommended approving it, so I propose we approve it. I can't see there's anything to say against it.
Seconded.
Okay, thank you, Ashton, for jumping in there.
Play around with this.
Approval and a seconder there. So we now move to the vote. Oh, sorry. I'm ever so sorry, Councillor Evans.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think it's quite an innovative design and quite interesting. Is for particularly children to learn about Lichfield is really, I think, quite important. So I fully support this and hope that it really does what it's designed to do, not only for enjoyment as far as sport goes, but to actually develop children's minds and other people's as to what is available and what Lichfield is all about.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, so now we'll move to a vote. So we're voting for approval. If you agree with that, if you could please raise your hand. I think you'll find that's unanimous. Okay, thank you, everybody. That has passed. So that was slightly easier than the last one and a bit less emotional. But that's good. Okay.
You're still on.
Yeah, we're still on because we've still got. Oh,
Right, I'll clear it.
oh I forgot it. Never got a copy of this. Do I need to?
It's on the agenda.
It's on the agenda. Yeah.
Got it. Oh, that's it. That's it. I've got another one.
The police are excited. Actually, me the police with the golf club from that last week. Anything I'd say, that's softer.
Just say we just move. Yeah.
They're
on me.
Okay, for the benefit of the live stream.